The following interview is part of the USMC Vietnam Tankers History Project and were recorded in the Vietnam Tankers Reunion in Washington, D.C. on October 30th, 2015. Would you please state your name, your unit, and your years in Vietnam?
Master Gunnery Sergeant Brad Goodin, retired. I was in the 3rd Tank Battalion in Vietnam in 1968 through 69, or portion of 69.
And you arrived in Vietnam at what rank?
PFC.
So you just came out of tank school?
Right.
And what rank were you when you left Vietnam?
Corporal.
Corporal. Mm-hmm. And tank commander?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Whatever you want to talk about with your Vietnam experience would be great. You want to talk about some boot camp?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start off with arriving in Vietnam. Prior to that, it was pretty standard. You know, I joined the Marine Corps in August of '67. Went to Vietnam the following January. Got there, I think it was on the 29th of January. Me and a friend of mine that was in the same platoon in boot camp, PFC Tuttle, was transported up to Phu Bai. We spent the first night in Da Nang and transported up to Phu Bai the next day to join our unit there in Phu Bai. The following day, well, that night we were put on guard duty at a bunker guarding the perimeter of the base there at Phu Bai when the Tet Offensive started.
1968.
68. And we were guarding this bunker. We were brand new in country, had no experience whatsoever with combat. And so that night when the incoming started, we thought that was the norm. And so we didn't do anything. We just sat there, waited for people to show up in front of the bunker. We were going to start shooting with this M60 machine gun they had left us with. And anyway, the sergeant come running around like with a chicken with the head cut off, and he put our minds on the straight and narrow after that. He says, "Hey, this don't happen all the time. This is out of the ordinary." So that was our first experience with combat. The following day, the plan was to take 4 tanks, 2 M48 A3s and 2 M67 A2 Flamethrower tanks up to Dong Ha from Phu Bai and get on a mic boat and go up the Qua Viet River to the ocean, or up the Perfume River to the ocean and up to the Qua Viet to Dong Ha.
And why were you going to Dong Ha? What was happening there?
Yeah, the 3rd Tanks was moving their battalion headquarters up to Dong Ha, and they had already moved all 3 gun companies, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie, up there, and we were the last 4 tanks from headquarters and service company to follow.
TLN and Charlie.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And what happened?
And anyway, on our way into Hue City, we got ambushed just on the south side, and on our way to the MACV compound there in Hue, and had some pretty terrible combat. The grunt unit that was with us, I think it was 1st Marines, took a terrible amount of casualties on this road going up there.
Anyway, this was the Tet Offensive?
Yeah,
okay.
Tet Offensive.
And the North Vietnamese were taking over the city?
Yeah, the battalion of North Vietnamese regulars had actually dug into all over Hue and were in the process of taking over the town. And when we arrived, and anyway, we started shooting our way into town. Finally arriving at the MACV compound, there was the 4 tanks, and there was a couple of Army Dusters that had 40mm guns mounted on open turrets. And plus there was a convoy of trucks. A couple of trucks had the Quad 50 machine guns on them. And so anyway, we got to the MACV compound and just kind of defensive perimeter set up for the next day, and then after that we started going out into the city and supporting the grunt units best we could.
Now,
You know,
some people are liking that MACV compound in that time, like the Alamo. Was
Yeah.
it like that?
yeah, kind of like that, yeah.
So the North Vietnamese completely surrounded?
Well, I don't know if they actually completely surrounded, but they were in the buildings directly in front of us.
And shooting into the
Yeah,
compound?
right. I don't recall any fire coming in from the behind us, but in the front there was a lot of RPGs and rifle fire, machine gun fire. So we started moving out from there, just street fighting, you know, building by building, and supporting a couple of grunt units. I think one of them was 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines.
Yep.
And we ended up going over by the soccer stadium there on the south side of Hue. By the way, the bridge that connected the two parts of the city,
The main bridge. Big bridge, okay.
across the Perfume River, had been destroyed. They blew it up the day we got there, I think, and so we didn't have any way of getting over to the other side of the river. So we were clearing street by street there on the south side of the river, building by building, and my tank commander, Corporal Charles West, was wounded. He got a shot through the shoulder.
By a sniper?
It was either a sniper or just a regular soldier. It was a hedgerow on this road on the way to the soccer stadium, and I think the guy stood up in that hedgerow, and I was driving the tank, and Charlie was up in the tank commander's cupola, and over the intercom I heard him say, "Ouch!" And I said, "What happened?" And he says, "I got hit by a rock." And then he said, "Oh, I'm bleeding." So he said he stuck his finger in the hole to stop the bleeding, come through his shoulder, just under his flak jacket. And so anyway, Charlie was medevaced, and we had a terrible firefight right after that. The lead tank, which was an M48A3 90 millimeter gun tank, was hit in the turret right below the loader's sight, or the gunner's sight. Probably a 57 millimeter recoilless, I think, hit it. And anyway, it took Tuttle's face off. Just he was the gunner.
And this is your buddy?
My buddy from boot camp, right. Yeah. So they medevaced him right in the middle of this firefight, and some guys did some pretty heroic efforts to get him out of that tank and
so while
medevac.
the tank was under fire and while the North Vietnamese were shooting and all that, they actually got him out of the tank and pulled him out of the tank and got him down and got him medevac.
Right.
Wow.
And my tank commander, Charlie, after he got shot, there was a guy behind our tank that we were backing up, and Charlie didn't want me to run over the guy.
Was a wounded grunt?
Yeah, he was wounded. So Charlie jumped out of the tank, being wounded himself, and got this guy out of the way.
Got him out of the way?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I could back up a little bit. All four of us were kind of backing up, except for that lead tank. Once it hit that turret, they were out of action.
So the one round knocked out the tank?
Yeah.
Okay, and the tank blew up and was exploded?
Well, there was. I saw the three guys get out of the turret: the tank commander, the loader, and the gunner. But the driver was still inside the tank. And
do you remember who that was?
Yeah, a guy named Berthold. I can't remember his full name, but he was kind of trapped in that tank by himself. Then the 90 millimeter rounds started exploding inside the turret.
And he's buttoned up.
And, yeah.
Was the gun tube over it so he couldn't get out?
Yeah. And anyway, he finally got that driver's hatch open and kind of squeezed out. He had two 45s in his hand, one in each hand. And
the bullets
they're all around him. They were kind of like a T intersection. And anyway, he jumped out of that tank and started running back behind it. Well, he got hit several times with rifle fire and went down. And of course, a couple of grunts, once he crawled back to the back of the first tank, the grunts grabbed him and pulled him back into safety. Of course, he was medevac.
While that's happening, the tank's burning and the 90 rounds are going off. And
right.
That alone must have been pretty exciting or crazy or whatever.
Yeah, you saw like a big Roman candle coming out of that loader's hatch, and so And then the firefight just stopped, and they decided to wait for another day, I guess.
The enemy disengaged.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So everybody went back to the compound?
Yeah. Well, after that, we kept on doing another mission. They diverted us over to another part of town. We were sporting some grunts. A couple of days prior to that, we had dumped our napalm load on several buildings on a street.
Dumped your napalm load?
Yeah, fired it. And
Talk about it. Can
Yeah.
you talk about that a little bit? 'Cause
Yeah.
I remember Charlie talking a little bit
Yeah,
about getting some sniper fire.
Yeah, so we traversed it. We were going down the street, supporting this grunt unit, 2-5, and they started getting some pretty severe fire from the left side of the street. So we traversed the turret over to that side and launched our napalm, and just traveling real slow, burning buildings as we went until our napalm tank was expended. And
So my understanding at that time was that no big weapons were allowed to be fired in the city. That there was no.
Yeah.
The main guns couldn't be fired. Is that?
yeah, that was
The flame tank wasn't supposed to fire.
well, no, we were allowed to fire.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
but it was when we first got there, it was there was word come down to try not to destroy much of that city because it was an old provincial capital, and they were afraid that it would cause a lot of international uproar.
Sure.
So we were restricted from bombing the place and calling in air support and all that. Naval gunfire was a no-no.
Okay.
So we were just restricted to the weapons we had at hand, and but several days after that, they lifted that after they realized we were taking so many casualties, and lifted that restriction, and they started calling in airstrikes and gunships and all that, So, and then a couple days later, the moderator here, Corporal John Ware, joined us, and he became the gunner on our tank, and they put the old gunner as TC, and I was stated as driver.
Scooby.
Yeah, good Scooby. And then we did the rest of our tour there in Hue City, just basically because we couldn't get any resupply of napalm or MOGAS or bring a compressor up to repressurize the air tanks in the tank. They used us as an ambulance, hauling wounded and dead back to the MACV compound. Yeah, and a machine gun for using our 30 caliber Brownings and the 50s. And but then what we were there, I guess 11, 12 days, and they decided to move us up to get us out of there and take us back to Dong Ha, or up to Dong Ha.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah, it was Valentine's Day. Yeah. So we were the day prior to that. We went down to the boat ramp there on the Perfume River, waiting for a Mike boat to show up, and that tank that we had that was destroyed, we had dragged that back to the boat ramp and basically salvaged the track off of it. That was about the other side. The track was all burned up, a lot of rubber track. So we had a crane come in and lift the tank up off the retriever and salvage the tank. At that time, we got incoming, and
While we're at the boat ramp.
yeah,
Yep.
it was mortar rounds coming in, and Scooby got hit, and he ended up getting medevaced. Yeah, as I recall, when when the rounds started coming in, I jumped under the tank, and he jumped on the side of it, and one round hit directly in front of him. And he was bleeding pretty good from all of the holes they put in his body. And anyway, they medevaced him, and that afternoon, I think, we got on the Mike boat, and the first one we got onto was sunk by mortar rounds. So they pulled off that Mike boat, and another one pulled up, and we got on it and headed down the Quaviette headed down the Perfume River to the ocean. By the time we got out in the ocean, the open ocean, it was dark, and it was a flat bottom boat, and everybody and their brother was sicker than a dog on that thing, except me. And they had cornbread and beans, hot beans for on that boat. So I was scarfing up on that stuff, but a lot of people got sick and couldn't handle the rolling of that flat bottom boat in the ocean.
There were beans all over the boat.
Yeah, they were hanging their head all over the gunnels. And
One thing I remember is we were going down the river toward the mouth of the river to go out in the ocean, and because the battle was still going on, we were shooting the .30 caliber off the side of the boat.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The captain told us to stop because he didn't want to call attention to the boat and have.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and one of them wanted to shoot that 90, and that was a guy who come down hard. He said, no.
Was that Richelieu? Was that?
I think.
Gun tanker?
Yeah, he was one of the gun tankers.
Let's go back a minute. You know those iconic photos of the two tanks with the grunts hiding behind them in the early part? This is just before Hall was killed?
Yeah, the ones
was that 3-2? Was that the other tank was 3-2?
Yeah, it was.
So it was you guys. I thought that was it. That was before. That was like maybe day 2 of the battle or something. It was early on in the battle when that guy took that picture. So I thought that was 3-2.
Yeah.
It was you can see Toy Yuan or whatever.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So talk a little bit more about your tour.
Yeah, so we got up to Dong Ha, and it was at dark when we pulled in there, and I remember they immediately, we were met by a couple of warrant officers, and they took us over and got us clean uniforms from a warehouse, and of course our military bearing wasn't what it should be, and this one supply lieutenant that was issuing all the gear to us reprimanded us a couple of times for not saying yes sir, no sir, and all that, you know. But then we were billeted there in Dong Ha at the tank park, and from there we started making operations up at Cam Lo Hill and the washout, Cantien, you know, thereabouts. Run over a couple of anti-tank mines while I was up there. One right outside of Cam Lo Hill there on a little operation, and another one up at Alpha 3 several months later. And had a lot of work putting those tanks back together. We're breaking track and putting new track on and new road wheels, and tapping those bolts out where the road wheels had housings had sheared off along the hull. That was a lot of work.
So talk about Task Force Robbie a little bit. I don't think any interviews have talked about Task Force Robbie.
Yeah, Task Force Robbie, we were...
and this is after Hue City?
Yeah, right. And it was up in the Cam Lo district in that part of the country. We started operations out there and supporting some grunt units. And I don't recall who those guys were, what battalion or regiment they were with.
I think the 4th Marines.
Might have been. And but that first mine that I ran over out there, I recall looking out my periscope to the left, because I was buttoned up in the driver's hatch, and a whole set of road wheels went flying off to the left out at that mine, and I saw this one grunt, and he saw it coming. He just squatted down right over the top of his head.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was quite a scene.
I think that operation that we were on, that we were trying to get to a unit, I think it was 9th Marines, or somebody was hitting the shed, and we were going to it, and the tanks had said, the Colonel Robichard just said, Paul Balson, get there.
Yeah.
I think that morphed into that huge battle, that 3-day battle that the 4th Marines had, where they walked into the buzzsaw up north of An Loc and Mai Si Tai and up there, and I think that we were supposed to get up there, and of course, I don't know, 5 or 6 tanks hit mines. The Goods that plant the mines.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the road that we were going on, and when we come up to a deep ravine where the road actually dipped down and went up. In my retrospect, I probably shouldn't have stayed on that road. I probably should have got off the side, because that's where the mine was. And thinking back, I said that was dumb of me doing that, but shit happens.
Exactly. But you remember when we hauled the tank back to Dong Ha and we were repairing the tank? For 3 days, you could hear the firefight going on down the river.
Right. Yeah, it was pretty
At the time, At the
intense.
time, I remember saying, "Oh my God, I'm glad I'm not there."
Yeah,
It's really a shame that more tanks couldn't have got
right.
there, because they probably would've
That's
broken
right.
up the fight
That's
a lot
right.
better, 'cause
That's
I
right.
think it was mostly just grunts
Yeah.
involved in that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another operation we were on. I don't know if we were still part of that task force rally or not, but we actually burned a side of a hill. You know, we went across our old rickety bridge that the guy was out ground guiding the tank across it, and our end connectors on the end of the track were just barely clearing each side. And that bridge, you could tell, had been there many years, and it was on its last leg, and a lot of rust on it, you know. So people were afraid it was going to collapse. But that 52-ton tank.
At that time, or were you still driving?
No, I was still driving. Yeah.
So was that when we went out with the Army?
I think it was.
We did an operation in the Army, and we ended up. You remember coming over the radio after we burned? That the guy said, "Oh, we burned the wrong place."
Yeah.
That was Easter
Right.
Sunday. It was
Right.
Easter Sunday.
Okay. Yeah.
And the infantry, the Army infantry guy made us shave.
Yeah.
You remember? We didn't have any water.
Yeah.
He made us shave. You
Yeah.
remember that?
Right. I remember that. Yeah, it was fun operating with those guys. They were a different breed.
So I think you were on Operation Thor, where all the tanks were lined up, and we did that huge sweep around Cantien and went all the way around Cantien, and there was like 25 tanks and the whole 9th Marine Regiment. Weren't you on that?
Yeah, Thor. Yeah.
Had you taken over the tank by then?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were, and I was the tank commander of the Flamethrower. I was in flames the whole time we were there, in my whole tour in Vietnam. So I got real familiar with that flame tank and how it operated. And, you know, it was a design nightmare. Whoever designed that pressurization system should be shot. You know, it was a nightmare setting the tank up to fire the napalm. You had 15 valves. You had to open in a sequence, and if you were out of sequence, you blew a safety header. And those safety headers were almost impossible to get to. You know, you've changed them. And
well, Howard Blum kind of went through the whole process, and why don't you also, with your own interpretation, talk about the process that the tank's empty, the bottle's empty, and there's no more pressure. What happened? What did you have to do? Could you be right on the spot and get it redone, or did you have to go somewhere to get it?
Well, you could have it redone, but you needed support. You needed an air compressor to be towed up, or go back to wherever our air compressor was, and you hook that air compressor up to the tank.
And it's a big air compressor.
Yeah, this was on a two-wheel air compressor, and you had to open up the loader's hatch and attach a hose to a valve there. The hose coming off the air compressor, and that's how you pressurize the tank. And also under that same loader's hatch, there was a cap that you unscrewed, which was the main bottle of the tank that held 350 gallons of napalm. And you would fill that tank up. We had an old 55-gallon drum with a funnel welded onto the bottom of it, and you would fit that funnel into that hole, and have to have a MoGas truck pull up alongside you and start pumping gas. We had a tent pole that we stuck down in the center of that barrel to clog the hole up. So you'd go ahead and pump the gas in and start mixing the napalm powder with it with another tent pole. And then when that 55-gallon drum got full, you'd pull that center pole out and let it all drain into the tank, and then start all over again until you got the whole 350 gallons put in there. And then you had your 3,000 psi of air, which actually launched the napalm out of a pretty small orifice, right about 3/4 way down the gun tube. Those gun tubes were designed to look similar to the M48 A3's tubes, so the enemy couldn't tell immediately whether you were a flame tank or not. But you know, us tankers and people around tanks know the difference. You can look at them and definitely see oh yeah, that's a flame tank.
So did the 3,000 pounds of air go into the bottle? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was a series of valves that pressurized that tank up to 3,000 psi max, and under the gunner's seat there was a little, like a dimmer switch on the floor, and you would push that dimmer switch down, and it lit a couple spark plugs, or started an arc because across some spark plugs about 3/4 of the way down the gun tube, right there at the nozzle where the napalm would come out, and that would light it off, and you would that pressure, force the napalm out probably 100 yards maybe. It would go a little farther, but it started breaking up after that, and not getting a very good bead. Especially on a windy day, it was even worse, or it would blow back on the tank in a windy day.
On the books, they said it could shoot 300 yards.
Yeah. That was pushing it.
Maybe with a tailwind, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I would be more comfortable with between 100 and 200 yards.
And normally, how do we deploy the napalm? Was it one big blast, or did you shoot the flame all the time?
Yeah.
Or did you do
sometimes you would shoot the flame all the time, but majority of the time you would just do a little burst,
10 seconds.
Yeah, 10 seconds or so. Stop and do another burst until you depleted the load. And yeah, it was. You had to warn the grunts around the tank that you were getting ready to shoot that fire, because they thought you were a gun tank. They didn't know anything about flamethrowers, so you had to warn them. And of course, when you started that flamethrower, you could see their eyes bulging out. Oh shit! They want to stay around this thing,
So now you were the gunner you were the driver much of the time that when you were the driver.
Right.
Half your tour or whatever.
Yeah, about a little less than half. Yeah.
Okay. So what was it like being inside the driver's compartment when the flamethrower went?
Yeah.
Did you ever stick your head out, or did you
No, I always buttoned up the hatch, because I was afraid that the napalm would blow back and get on me, and once that stuff's on you, it sticks to like jelly.
Sticks to kids?
Yeah.
So was it loud? Was it scary? Was it noisy? Was it?
It was like a big rush of air. You could hear it whoosh, like that, and no explosions or anything. But
it wasn't like a big gun going off.
No.
Main gun going off and blowing out your ears or anything.
No.
Like that. So it's almost eerie.
Right. Yeah, it was very.
How about the 30 going off?
Yeah, the 30 in the driver's hatch, you could hear it chugging along, but it wasn't very loud. You had your helmet on, and it was
going
right. Yeah.
So yeah.
So
it wasn't that bad.
No. You could hear the 50 better than the 30 because it made a bigger noise, And but we didn't use that 50 that often. You only had a 50 round box mounted. That 50 was laid on its side, and on its left side, and fed from the right, the way we had it set up in those cupolas. And the tank commander had an electrical solenoid under one handle, and that's how you fired that gun, via the electrical solenoid.
And the handle did what?
Yeah, you had one handle you turned, and the turret or the cupola traversed differently from the main gun. You could go other directions with it from where the main turret was, and the other one was elevation. The guy could crank it, and there was a little button on top of that elevation side which actually fired the machine gun.
And why didn't we use it? Because it was on its side. What was the problem?
Yeah, in order to fit it into that cramped cupola, that was how the engineers designed it, so the machine gun could lay on its left side and feed from the right. They could have designed it the other way. That was the beauty of that 50 Browning, is you could feed it from either side just by changing a little linkage. But that's the way, though, they had it set up in that tank.
And nowadays they have the M50 on a post, and it's all
Right.
solenoid on, and it goes.
Yeah.
How come our guns didn't do that?
I don't know. I really don't know why we didn't design them like that, or for the Marine Corps anyway. The Army, as I recall, always had their 50s up there on a
Sky mount?
right. And I don't know why the Marine Corps never done that.
Okay.
But yeah, it was an interesting time. Another incident, John and I were on a trip up to a place called Charlie 4 from the Quaviat River. And it was a big, huge, cloudy day. It started raining real hard. Anyway, we were directed to go up to Charlie 4, and there was at least 2 tanks, maybe more, in that little column. But we were told to stay off the beach because they were worried about the beach being anti-tank mined. So we were staying off in the surf as much as we could. But this typhoon come up and started breaking waves over the top of that tank, and the tank on the inside just filled up with water. And I don't know if the tank commander had the cupola open or not, but it was definitely filling up with water. I was driving, and I could feel the water coming up around my legs and finally up around my shoulders. I said, oh shit, I got to do something here. So I reached down and opened up that escape hatch, which was under the driver's seat, and just let it fall out. And kept on trucking. We didn't want to stop, with all that waves breaking over us. That sand would have probably swallowed us up, so we just kept on trucking. And that water would recede, and the next wave would come, and it would fill back up, and it would recede, We did that. That happened 10 or 12 times before we got up to where we were going there.
Tank was I thought my tank was the only tank going up the...
Yeah.
In my mind, I was the only tank, and you're right.
Yeah.
The gunner had water up to his knees.
Yeah. I remember I was
down and seeing the water in the turret.
Yeah, I was following another tank because the rain was hitting my face so hard that I was having a hard time seeing. And so if that other tank hadn't been there to follow, I would have probably...
That was my tank in the front.
Yeah, I'd have probably veered off into the ocean or something,
Yeah. I remember going like this and turning the cupola.
Yeah.
Because the rain was so hard. It was
Right.
a typhoon. It was
It was really hard driving rain.
And the waves were coming over the top of the tank.
Yeah, that was an experience. It was and then when we turned, finally, I remember we were having a hard time figuring out where C4 was, All we knew was off to the left somewhere. And finally, it was you or somebody said they saw an old flag beating in the wind and said, okay, this is it. And we turned there and luckily got into the compound.
Was flooded.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And we had that great dye marker bunker.
Yeah. And I remember snakes, you could see snakes swimming around in that water and I'm sure they were poisonous, Yeah.
Crazy. Did you go up to Ocean View with us?
No.
Okay, so you stayed at C4?
Yeah.
And then we ended up going back to Pine Tree.
Right.
So how do you remember much about Micey Tai and Ann Lock and when the Charlie Company moved up there?
Yeah, I remember we took a mic boat out of Dong Ha, and they dumped us off there at Micey Tai, and it was right as it was getting dark, and we were very apprehensive of where we were and what was around there, or at least I was.
No grunts.
Yeah, there was no supporting arms at all around us, and getting off there and then setting up a temporary perimeter. But that's about all I remember of Micey Tai. I don't think we may have done a couple operations out of there, but I can't recall.
I remember that they didn't have any grunts, and so they took a platoon of tankers and made them grunts.
Okay.
And they ended up going on patrols and sweeps.
Yeah.
We went out with them a few times, and I remember one time going out and being near a graveyard at night with the tanker grunts around us.
Yeah.
And you could see the gooks running around out there.
Yeah. Huh.
And they told us not to fire. We called in mortars.
Yeah. I remember that one.
That was the first time I saw, besides like a Kantian scene and Way Out, but I'd seen it close up. I'd never seen it before. It was really scary.
It was a big, I remember it was a big, tall, I think it was a captain. You could see his bars everywhere. I think he only...
CO?
Yeah. Goochma, yeah.
We call him Weird Harold?
Yeah, World Herald. He's an odd one, but I remember him a couple times, but just because he was so tall and you stood out from everybody,
Do you remember Top Langford?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's still around.
Is he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's down in Carlsbad.
I'll be darned.
Right, yeah, not doing well. He's not healthy, but...
That's too bad.
He was probably the best staff NCO I ever.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a good one. Yeah. So then.
Remember rat patrols?
Yep.
Talk about that.
Yeah, after we got back from to Quang Tri from the Qua Viet C4 area, they started using us to escort ammo trucks from Quang Tri. Where it was from Dong Ha to Quang Tri. Yeah, they were hauling ammo up from. So at nights we would go and escort those ammo trucks up and back and forth. You know, one convoy we'd catch at Dong Ha, escort them up to Quang Tri, turn around and go back to Dong Ha and wait for another convoy. And so they used us as a deterrent, I guess.
Rat patrol.
Yeah, rat patrol. And medevaced out, or not medevaced, but got out of there and went home. And I think it was February, latter part of February of '69. And got back to 5th Tanks at Camp Pendleton there at Los Flores. And they put me as an instructor on a blade tank. That, I mean, all the electrical systems worked on that tank, no problem, but you couldn't move the blade because they were waiting for a hydraulic accumulator to show up. Well, all the priority went to Vietnam, so that tank was low on priority, and who knows how long I've been sitting there. But you couldn't move that tank without lifting that blade, and you couldn't lift the blade. So anyway, I was training troops, young Marines, on how the turret operated, and you know, it was an M48 turret. So, and then I was all hyped about getting out of the Marine Corps because I only come in on a 2-year enlistment. At that time, they were letting people out as soon as they got back from Vietnam. And Staff Sergeant Dover Randolph was the career planner there at 5th Tanks. And so he had me come in his office one day and set me down and started.
You're a corporal then?
I'm a corporal, yeah. And he started telling me all the advantages of re-enlisting, you know, and but then he threw the aviation out in front of me. And he said, well, you know, you can re-enlist and transfer over to the air wing. He says, in fact, I can probably get you promoted to sergeant before you go. So I went home and
you're married?
Yeah, I'm married. I'd married my wife while I was home on leave from Vietnam.
No kids, but you married.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a little apartment out in San Clemente. In fact, Dover was a duplex, and Dover was my neighbor. So he'd talked to me several times about re-enlisting.
Let's have a beer.
Yeah. And anyway, he convinced me to re-enlist, so I did. I joined for another 4 years and
went to the wing.
And went to the air wing. They sent me to NAS Millington, Tennessee, to get the basic aviation maintenance schooling.
Is that Memphis?
Yeah, right outside of Memphis, just north. And that's where all the Navy and Coast Guard aviation types go to school in the Marine Corps. So they get their basic training there for aviation maintenance. So I went there, got my A school, what they call A school, out from underneath by being an aircraft metalsmith, and was transferred to Marine Corps Air Station El Toro. Spent many years there. Got up to the rank of gunnery or staff sergeant. Got orders down to the drill field in San Diego. Went down there. Went to drill instructor school. I think I run 2 platoons through before I got orders right after that to go to Marine Corps Air Station, Yuma, Arizona. They were hurting for aviation people down there, so left drill school, went down there.
And it's not normal just to go through two platoons.
Yeah, I usually just hang around for 4 or 5 platoons.
Right.
And but I was in the 3rd Battalion there, and so in fact that was the battalion I went through boot camp with.
And Quonset huts?
Still had Quonset huts then, yeah. And then years later, I went back when my son joined the Marine Corps, and I went down there for his graduation, and of course all those Quonset huts were gone. It was all new barracks and all that, you know. But
so you went to Yuma?
Went to Yuma and did a 3-year tour there.
Still
with my
staff?
wife, still a staff sergeant, and yeah, I worked at what they call the Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Department there. It was a joint Navy Marine Corps command, and we supported transit aircraft that come through the base on various training exercises. And yeah, I worked on F-4 Phantoms, AVAB Harriers, A-4 Skyhawks, C-130s.
All fast movers, mostly.
Yeah, yeah. I was in a fixed wing. I never did go to a rotor wing. I always stayed in fixed wing. And from there, I got orders to Iwakuni, Japan. Went over there on a 13-month unaccompanied tour.
Wanted to stay in Yuma?
Yeah, well, I ended up sending her back to where her family was, and she got an apartment back there, Illinois. Yeah.
Now, do you have any kids by then?
Yeah, I had 2 kids. They were both born in Yuma right before I left. With the youngest one was just only like 3 months old when I got the orders. So she took the kids back there, and I went to Iwakuni and supported working at what they call a headquarters and maintenance squadron there, which supported 3 squadrons of F-4s, F-4Ns. During that tour, it was called into the AMOs, the Aircraft Maintenance Officer's office one day, and he says, "Hey, I need you to go down to Pearl Harbor and pick up some airplanes, and we're bringing them back up here to Japan on an LPH, a helicopter carrier." So I snatched 3 or 4 guys from a couple of the supporting gun squadrons. We flew up to Tokyo, took a commercial flight down to Honolulu, and went over to Pearl Harbor. And the LPH New Orleans was just coming into port and just picked up the space capsule that had docked with the Russians. Remember that event, 1975? And so they were craning that off the flight deck, that capsule, and as we were craning the Phantoms onto the ass end of the airplane on the fantail there, they were on a barge over at Ford Island, brought them over and started chaining them down on the flight deck. And a couple days later, we sailed for Japan, run into a terrible storm off of Okinawa, and as that ship was rolling, I heard the chains on them aircraft creak, creak, snap, they would go. And I had 43 chains on each airplane. And so I'd have the guys to run out there with replacement chains and, snatch them on.
Didn't lose any aircraft?
No, you could.
48 chains?
Yeah, on each airplane.
Yeah,
when you run in real heavy weather, the ship rolls at a pretty good angle, and those airplanes are heavy. And they start moving on you if you don't have enough chains.
Did you tell me the other night that one of the guys, your working party guys, took off into Hawaii? Is that
no.
No. Okay.
No.
Okay.
No,
somebody told me they met some girl and
no,
okay.
No, it didn't happen to me. Now I did take later on after we got those aircraft back to Japan. They had rented a seagoing barge from some local Japanese company and a seagoing crane, and we craned them off the fantail there at Iwakuni onto these barges and took them to the beach and offloaded them and got them ready for a deployment down to the Philippines. The squadron was VMFA 115, and they were trading airplanes from the old F-4Bs to F-4Js. The Navy was transitioning from F-4s to F-14s at that time in Miramar, so they got rid of their Js and sent them to the Marines.
Yeah.
And
send me your trash. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, they were in pretty sad shape, and by the time we got to Japan, plus with all that, those aircraft were in cocoons, which was a big. It was a big barrier that basically wrapped around the airplane, a shrink wrap almost you'd call it. But during the typhoon, the rainstorms, those things were leaking and started filling up with water. And you could just, by the minute, you could see them growing. I had to send guys out with a razor blade to slice them down the center and let the water drain out. So we got the airplanes there to the beach, and that stuff was hanging. Those airplanes looked nasty. AMO chewed my ass. He says, "I don't know what the hell," So I broke up my logbook and I said, "Here, this is what happened on our trip. And oh, okay. Yeah. So anyway, the squadron was in a hurry to make their deployment to the Philippines, and they worked their ass off for a good 4 or 5 days trying to get those airplanes up to where they do a decent acceptance inspection and get them ready to go on their deployment, which everybody wanted to get out of Japan and go to the Philippines, you know, for the liberty and,
Sure.
and the cheap living down there. So, yeah, and a couple of months later, my AMO asked me to go down to the Philippines and set up a corrosion control team for these F4s that we were supporting. So again, I took 4 or 5 guys with me down there. So we went down to the cubic point in the Philippines and got a hangar from the Navy that was empty, and started running airplanes through there about 1 a week, taking them through a corrosion control program, you know, taking all the corrosion off of them, scuff painting them and repainting them the best we could at our level of maintenance, and sent them back. And I did that until my tour was up, and my 13-month tour, and then I come back. From there, went back to El Toro, several schools later, NDI school, B school of metalsmith. Then I got asked to go up to NAS Lemoore, California, which was the Navy's master jet base there on the West Coast, to set up the F-18 program. The Marine Corps and Navy was in the process of switching from F-4s in the Marine Corps and the Navy A-7s to the F-18s. So we went up there. I worked on what they called the Fleet Introduction Team for 3 years, traveling mostly back to McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis on a weekly basis to work out a lot of the logistics problems and learn the airplane, you know, help them write maintenance manuals, stuff like that. So my last tour in the Marine Corps, I went, let me take that back. I went back to El Toro after the 3-year tour up there at Lemoore, and became the maintenance chief of the headquarters and service squadron there at Mag 11. And then I was, yeah, the Marine Aircraft Group 11 headquarters was there. And we were still supporting the RF-4Bs and F-4s. So we transitioned all those over to F-18s, with the exception of the RF-4B squadron, VMF FP3, and became the maintenance chief of 2 gun squadrons, VMFA 531 for 3 years, and then VMFA T101 that used to be at Yuma, but had moved up to El Toro. And
are you master gunnery now?
Yeah, I got promoted to master gunnery sergeant, and I was in 531 after 22 years in the Marine Corps. And then Headquarters Marine Corps called me up one afternoon and says, "Hey, we need a guy to go over to Camp Smith, Hawaii, and be the aircraft maintenance liaison for the CGFMF PAC which was a 3-star general staff there at Camp Smith." So I went home, talked to Wanda about it. She says, "Okay, I'm ready." She says, "I've been with you for 22 years and we've never been out of the country." So she says, so we went over there, and
Hawaii's tough.
Yeah. So it was expensive in Hawaii, but it was fun. So they put us up in the Hilton Hawaiian Village for 2 months, waiting for base housing. It was pretty tough living there. And then, so I stayed on the staff there for the CG for 2.5 years. Had all the intentions of staying for a full 30 in the Marine Corps, but after the 26 years, I got a call from a friend of mine that was working for Northrop Grumman in El Segundo, California. He says, "Hey, you want a job?" And I said, "Doing what?" And he said, "Well, about the same thing you're doing over there." He says, "But I'll pay you 4 times as much." I says, "Well, when do I start?" And so I went and I said, "Hey, I'm going to have to go through the process of requesting to retire and all that." So that took me about 30 days to get that done. The headquarters Marine come back and approved the retirement. So I had my move set up, and so we went back to Rancho Santa Margarita, California, where I renting a house, and started working for Northrop, and ended up working for them for 20 years on the F-18 program, and then eventually the B-2 program up at Palmdale, and a couple of black programs. And my last program was the RQ-180, which the Air Force has just most recently fielded. And then I retired from Northrop. The wife and I decided to get out of California after being on the West Coast for 43 years and come back to Missouri. I bought property in Missouri and got a house with a couple of outbuildings, a little pond on it, 3 acres, and I'm happy.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Brad, seriously, we're right at the time mark,
okay.
So perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Great.